So for those of you that don't know and couldn't spot this big 3-foot logo behind me, we're Jupiter Advertising. We're an employer marketing communications agency based up in Manchester. We're actually part of a much bigger group that take care of everything to do with candidate attraction, onboarding, applicant tracking systems, right the way through to internal culture management. So we take care of the whole journey across several different brands. And these are just some of the companies that we've been working with just over the last few years. But it's important to point out that although you see a lot of big names here that we wave our banner about, a lot of the work we do is actually with much smaller organisations that are facing recruitment challenges, be that struggling to find candidates for niche roles or if they're suffering some kind of internal culture management problems. Anyway, it's not often we get to speak to so many recruitment leaders all at once, so it's kind of important to us that we don't waste it. And I didn't want to come up here and go through the usual procedure of talking through a case study or something we've done well in the past that every agency does. I thought we'd talk about everyone's favourite topic, good old Brexit. Sorry, I heard a few groans there. And whatever your political allegiance, though, I think we can all agree that we're about to walk in some really uncertain political times. It's going to have a huge impact on our industry and the way we do our jobs. So, first of all, I want you to cast your mind back about 10 months or so, before we'd all been consumed by this Brexit apathy when there was other important stuff being talked about on the news, like the World Cup. We had this idea that times were good, and there was actually a little bit of excitement about Brexit because good old Theresa was off to meet Michelle again, and for the final Brexit negotiations, as it was at the time. And it was thought that by that Friday we'd have the outlines of our deal and we'd know what it was going to look like. So we thought we'd put together a series of white papers and some documentation about how the deal would impact Brexit in each different industry and what the outcome might be and how clients could weather the storm, if indeed there was going to be a storm. Of course, she came back with a Chequers deal, though, so all this excitement was really short-lived. And since then, by the way, because we've had about 80 different variations of deal proposed, these have now been rewritten more times than Katie Price's marriage certificate. So. Anyway, we produced these ebooks. Unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to share all the data with you today because there's just too much of it. And I can't go into too many specifics, but if anyone wants to know more later about their particular industry or challenge they're facing, please come and grab me later. I'll be more than happy to talk to you. Alternatively, head over to our website. You can register now, and once we know what the final deal looks like, we'll very soon after release an ebook for you. Anyway, the first thing just going to go over, so today I'm just going to skim a few points, things we all need to be mindful of, and then after that a couple of steps that I think we should all be taking to prepare ourselves for Brexit. So the first thing I think we need to be mindful of, it's very likely that in the next 2 years we are going to hit a recession. I know that's not a popular opinion, but we've spoken to a lot of people about this and we think this is what's going to happen. If you look over the last 50 years, you'll see that recessions are actually relatively forecastable. Much as we don't like to talk about it, you can predict them relatively accurately. They're normally triggered by some sort of event that causes a bit of uncertainty and instability and a lack of faith in the economy. Obviously in 2008, we had the banks collapsing. In the 90s, we had oil prices. And in the 80s, we switched from being a manufacturing-based nation to a more service-led country. And again, I think we all know we're walking into very uncertain times, and it's very likely that as we're already a few years overdue, this is going to cause a bit of a ripple in the market. The second thing is that we are going to experience massive talent voids. I don't have time to go into all this data with you, but I can later. Certain industries rely very heavily on EU migrant workers, and although it hasn't been finalised what exactly the deal and what this landscape is going to look like, it's very likely that we're going to see some sort of restriction on the number of EU migrants that we can hire, particularly if this £30,000 threshold is brought in. And even if your industry doesn't rely heavily on these workers, by the way, be prepared that when other industries like food, drink, manufacturing, warehousing, when they're not finding the talent in the places that they normally would, they're going to start looking elsewhere, and it's very likely they may start looking at people from your industries. Again, I don't have time to go into all the data, but please grab us later. And the final thing that I think we should all be aware of, which is probably a little bit less depressing, is there are going to be some companies that really capitalise on this and see this as an opportunity. If you look at the last recession, some brands had a meteoric rise to success. I know Primark, obviously, as a discount brand, was the natural one we think of. But some other companies as well, like Ford, Lego, Amazon, they all had an entrepreneurial mindset and they all adapted new technologies. And because of that, they were able to buck the trend and grow quite rapidly. So if recessions teach us anything, it's that you need to be open to new technologies. And I promise you, in the next couple of years, you will see a company standing up here giving a talk like this about their huge rise to success and how they've achieved it. So there's just a couple of things that I think we all need to be mindful of. But there are a few things we can do just to brace ourselves and prepare for what's happening next. The first step I think we should all be taking is to develop new talent pools. We've had some really interesting talks today about diversity and inclusion and opening your doors up and welcoming people from different backgrounds and communities that perhaps we haven't in the past. I think this is absolutely vital. I don't want to regurgitate everything that's already been said today. I think they put it far more eloquently than I ever could. But a good example of this and a good market that I think we should perhaps all be talking to is returning parents. It's an obvious choice. It's madness because they're a section or a community and a demographic that has been somewhat pushed to the side in recent years, and they're actually one of the easiest and most cost-effective demographics to target. And it can show some brilliant returns. Again, if you want more information on this, one of my colleagues, Doug, he's run some brilliant campaigns for the likes of Sainsbury's and O2. I think you should have a chat with him and he can point you in the right direction. Again, the same can be said for other demographics as well. As your parents returning, the over 50s market proves to be a brilliant source of talent. People with disabilities, which obviously I don't want to regurgitate from earlier. Looking at people on the autistic spectrum, I'll kind of linger on this one a little bit. I don't know if any of you are familiar with Auto Trader's work recently. They've completely revolutionised their website and changed the language on there to make it more inclusive to people with autism. And they say it's had some fantastic results and they've actually hired some brilliant staff off the back of it. Again, if you want more information on this, please come and grab me later. And finally, ex-offenders. I don't know if any of you are familiar with Timpson's work recently. Has anybody heard of the Timpson's case study? Yeah, a couple of people. Just over 10% of their workforce now are ex-offenders. And you speak to the senior management there, they tell you that they're the best and most loyal staff that they've got because they've been given an opportunity. I know certain industries are unable to do this, but I think if you are, you should really look to this market because it's an untapped gold mine. And thirdly, secondly, if I can count, you really need to develop your employer brand. And I know that's a really generic statement, but I think you need to dig into that. Before you all came here today, you were asked to fill out a short survey about what you were looking to glean from the day and things you were looking to learn. And there were a couple of interesting things in there, but most of you wrote some variation of, I'm looking to improve my employer brand. But that's kind of a generic comment, and I go to a lot of these conferences and everyone's looking to do the same thing, but there's a very broad idea of what that means. And it's almost like a lot of companies don't realise it, but they're kind of giving it lip service by not digging into the detail. By the way, can I just have a quick show of hands here? Whose company here is engaging with an employer branding agency? 1, 2, 3, 4. So about 5 or 6 of you. Okay. If you take anything away from today, and I'm not just saying that because that's what we do, there's 2 other employer branding agencies in the room who've done some brilliant work in the last couple of years. If you don't want to talk to us, talk to them. But whatever you do, get a relationship because we've seen it all. We're entrenched in this market. And I promise you, we've made and learned from every mistake that you might be about to make. So before you go spending your recruitment budget on some new media source that's promising you dramatic results or doing something that you've never done before, just seek the advice of someone from an employer branding agency because I'm sure we'll all be happy to help and give you some tips. Again, the benefits of employer branding are quite plain to see. The more you invest in it, your recruitment spend will actually come down over time. Again, I can go into more detail on this later on if anyone wants to grab me and we'll talk through it in more detail. And again, going beyond that, I want to talk about that. I think it's important that you establish your company as an identity as an employer. It's never been more important to become a destination employer and an employer of choice right now. So you've got to make sure that people that don't work for you know what it's like to work for you. You give yourself a marked culture. Again, just some of the work we've done for Wagamama's to help them do that, and some of the work we've done for Motorpoint as well that's really helped transform the way that they recruit, the type of profile they look for. Okay, answer. And thirdly, something that I think is becoming more and more important is to really manage your culture. This is another thing that I feel like a lot of people, without knowing, give lip service to. I think we all see that it's become a bit of a fashion lately to have a really trendy office, and you go in and there's a ball pool and a slag and a bean bag. By the way, I'm a child of the 90s, so I love a bean bag. This isn't, don't get me wrong. But you really need to go deeper than that. And one of the many pitfalls I think people fall into here is that it's not sincere. A lot of the time we're working with companies whose culture is the management team trying to dictate what the culture will be in that organisation. It never works. You've got to build it from the bottom up, and you've got to seek the input and advice from your staff and your employees. That's how you get engagement. And if you have a problem in your culture, it's something you've got to meet head on. And I know that sounds quite scary, owning up to what might be a big issue, but if you meet it head on, it's like any bad feedback, you'll always get better results. Again, this is some work we've done for McCain here, where we transformed their culture, and I think we took their staff retention from their leavers at one point were about 60% of the workforce, and we reduced that down to somewhere closer to the 10% mark in a period of 12 months. If you want more information on this, speak to this chap here, Doug. He can talk you through that in great detail. So that's your culture. And that's it. If anybody has any questions, I'd be happy to try and answer.